What happens when a ruthless gang targets a quiet, returning war hero, only to discover he's the most dangerous man they could face? Watch as Jamal Hayes, a decorated Marine, fights back and uncovers a dark secret, an underground network that has been tearing apart his community. Now he'll take on more than just hate. He'll dismantle the system that's been oppressing them all. Raymond Ray Harper's hands gripped the steering wheel of his truck, his knuckles white. It had been months since he last saw this place, the quiet suburban neighborhood that used to be home. After serving in the military for over a decade, Ray had grown accustomed to the chaos of battlefields in foreign lands, the rush of adrenaline that came with every mission, and the constant movement. But now he longed for the peace he thought he would find when he returned home. His truck rolled smoothly down the familiar road, past the rows of identical houses, each with manicured lawns and trimmed hedges. For a moment, Ray almost forgot about the weight pressing down on him, the stress of coming back to a place that was supposed to feel like sanctuary. But in the back of his mind, something didn't seem right. As he rounded the corner and his house came into view, that feeling of unease became reality. His breath caught in his throat. The front lawn, once neat and welcoming, was now a mess of broken bottles, fast food wrappers, and discarded beer cans. But it wasn't the trash that made his stomach turn. It was the graffiti. Bold, hateful slurs were painted across the side of his house, vivid against the white siding. Swastikas and other racist symbols marred the walls like scars. His porch, once adorned with a welcome mat, was now burned and scorched. Ray slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. The truck came to a halt at the edge of his driveway, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires breaking the heavy silence. For a moment, Ray just sat there, staring at the destruction, unable to believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message, an attack on everything he had fought for. He knew what he had to do, but the overwhelming surge of anger made it hard to think clearly. He threw the truck into park and opened the door, stepping out onto the gravel driveway. His boots crunched beneath him as he walked toward the house, his mind racing. The closer he got, the more the rage simmered beneath his calm exterior. His training in the military had always been about control, discipline, and knowing when to strike. But seeing his home like this, a place he had fought to protect and defend, pushed him past the point of reason. He moved toward the front steps, the smell of burnt fabric and alcohol wafting in the air. That's when he heard the laughter. Ray turned his head sharply toward the sound. There by his fence stood 6 men, their heads shaved clean, tattoos marking their necks and arms. They were drinking beer, leaning against the fence as if they owned the place, admiring their handiwork. Ray's fists clenched at his sides. One of the men, a hulking figure with a scar running down his cheek, noticed him first. He took a long swig from his can, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Hey there, Marine," he called out mockingly, raising his beer in a salute. "Like the welcome home gift?" Ray didn't respond immediately. He stood there, chest rising and falling, his breath steady despite the burning rage inside him. This was his home, his sanctuary, and they had desecrated it. The leader of the group, the man with the scar, stepped forward. "What's the matter, Marine? You going to call the cops?" He laughed cruelly, spreading his arms wide. "Good luck with that. They won't do a damn thing for someone like you." Ray's jaw tightened. The restraint he felt was a testament to the years of military training he had undergone, where every instinct was about survival. But his mind was clear. He couldn't let these men win. They wanted him to react, to fight with emotion. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Not yet. Instead, his voice was low and steady. "Get off my property. Now." The group paused for a moment, surprised by his calm but firm tone. The leader, Scarface, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. He was testing Ray, trying to provoke a response. "Or what?" Scarface sneered. "You think you can make us leave?" Ray's muscles coiled. His military training screamed at him to engage, to use his fist to end this before it escalated. But he stood his ground, the fire in his gut pushing against the discipline he had worked so hard to develop. "You don't belong here. Leave now." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, and the men behind him exchanged glances. The tension in the air was palpable. Ray could feel his heart beating faster, but he kept his expression neutral, his eyes steady. These men were trying to intimidate him, but Ray had faced far worse than a pack of racist bullies. Scarface's voice broke the silence, a low growl that dripped with menace. "You're trespassing. This isn't your home anymore, Marine. We decide who stays and who goes." Ray's body tensed, but he didn't raise his voice. His hand twitched at his side, his fingers curling into fists. The restraint was becoming harder to maintain. "I said, leave. Now." Scarface's grin widened, and for a brief moment, Ray saw fear flicker in his eyes. It was there and gone in an instant, replaced by arrogance. "You think that uniform makes you untouchable?" Scarface spat. "You're just a man, and here, you don't matter." Before Ray could respond, one of the men behind Scarface threw a bottle at the porch. It shattered against the steps, sending glass flying in all directions. The sound was the catalyst that snapped Ray's patience. His hand shot out, grabbing Scarface by the collar, and in one swift motion, Ray slammed him into the ground. The other men rushed at him, but Ray was faster, his movements fluid and precise. He ducked under a punch, his fist driving into the gut of the next man, sending him stumbling back. His training kicked in. Block, strike, move. A knee to the chest knocked another man off his feet, and Ray pivoted, knocking out the legs of the fourth attacker with a well-placed sweep. But even as he fought, Ray knew this wouldn't end here. They would be back. This was only the beginning. The sounds of laughter and chaos from the gang lingered in Ray's mind long after the fight had ended. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white, his breath ragged. The fight had been brief, but it wasn't over. He could feel the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, the anger simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't just about defending his home anymore. It was personal. As the last of the gang members scattered, retreating down the street, Ray stood in the middle of his front yard, his chest heaving with exertion. He could feel his muscles aching from the fight, but the pain was nothing compared to the burning rage inside him. He had done his best to hold back, but it wasn't enough. These men, these cowards, had crossed a line that Ray couldn't ignore. He couldn't just let them go, not after everything they had done. Ray's eyes narrowed as he glanced back at the damage they had done to his home. The broken bottles, the scorched porch, the hateful graffiti. It wasn't just an attack on his property. It was a message, one that said he wasn't welcome here, that his presence in this town was unwanted. He wasn't about to let them win, not when he had sacrificed so much to defend this country. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and Ray pulled it out with a sigh. It was a message from his sister, Maya. "You home yet? I heard what happened. Let me know if you need anything." Ray hesitated for a moment, then typed back, "I'm fine. Just a bit of a mess to clean up." He put the phone back in his pocket, his mind already racing with thoughts of what to do next. The gang wasn't just some random group of troublemakers. No, this was organized. They had a plan, a mission. The symbols on the walls, the way they spoke, the way they operated, it all pointed to something much bigger than a few angry men with nothing better to do. Ray didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't take them down alone. He picked up his phone again and dialed a number he knew by heart. After a few rings, the call was answered. "Zane," Ray said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need your help." There was a brief silence on the other end before Zane's voice came through, low and concerned. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Ray replied quickly, not wanting to get into the details of the fight. "Listen, it's bigger than just a few idiots with spray paint. There's a group in this town that's been terrorizing black families. They think they can scare us into leaving. They just hit my house and I need to take them down. I can't do it alone." Zane was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm on my way. We'll take care of this." Ray didn't have to say more. Zane had always been the kind of man who acted first and asked questions later. He was loyal to a fault, and Ray knew he could count on him. He hung up the phone and ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. The next step would be crucial. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping something much larger. If the gang was connected to bigger forces in the town, then they needed to know that they wouldn't be able to hide behind their connections for much longer. Ray grabbed his gear from the truck, the familiar weight of his combat knife and sidearm grounding him. He wasn't going into this unprepared, not this time. The night stretched on as Ray waited. It wasn't long before the headlights of Zane's truck cut through the darkness, pulling into the driveway. Ray stood at the edge of the porch, watching as his friend climbed out of the truck. Zane was tall, lean, and had the kind of sharp, calculating eyes that had made him one of the best Marines Ray had ever worked with. His face was hard, a stark contrast to the warmth that Ray had come to know in their friendship. Zane walked toward him, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He didn't speak immediately, taking in the sight of the broken windows and the damage to the house. When he did speak, his voice was low but filled with intent. "I knew it was bad, but I didn't think it was like this." Ray nodded grimly. "It's just the beginning. They're going to keep coming. We need to shut them down before they get bolder." Zane met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "What do you need me to do?" "I've been thinking. We need to hit them where it hurts," Ray said, his mind already working through the strategy. "I know this isn't just some street gang. They've got connections, people in power. The way they operate, the way they get away with everything, it's more than just local troublemakers. There's a whole system backing them up." Zane's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about more than just these guys?" "Yeah, I think they're being funded by someone, maybe even high-ranking people in this town. And it's not just about getting them off the street. It's about taking down the whole network. If we don't stop it now, they'll just get stronger." Zane nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" "We need intel," Ray said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We need to find where they're meeting, who's funding them, and who's helping them hide their operations. We hit them at their core, then we take them down." Zane smirked, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Sounds like the kind of thing I signed up for. But we'll need more than just the two of us." Ray nodded. "I've got one more person I can count on." Travis Lang. Zane's face lit up. "Travis? Hell yeah. If anyone can take down an operation like this, it's him." Ray smiled faintly. "I'll call him now." He pulled out his phone again and dialed the number for Travis, another Marine who had been with him on several deployments. Like Zane, Travis was no stranger to danger, and no stranger to doing what was necessary to make things right. After a few rings, Travis picked up. "Lang here." "Travis, it's Ray," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need you here. We've got a problem, a big one." Travis paused for a moment, then responded with a low chuckle. "Ray Harper asking for help? Never thought I'd see the day. What's going on?" "They're coming for us," Ray said. "A gang, organized and backed by people in power. They've been terrorizing this neighborhood, and they just hit my house. I need you here now." The seriousness in Ray's voice cut through the banter. "You got it, Ray. I'll be there soon." Ray hung up, his eyes meeting Zane's. "Travis is on his way. We'll make a plan once he gets here." Zane nodded. "Good. You've got a team now. We'll take them down. We'll end this." Ray looked at his house again, the destruction still fresh in his mind. But now, as his friends prepared to stand by him, he felt a small sense of relief. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting everyone they loved, and that meant doing whatever it took to win. The air in Ray's living room was thick with tension as he, Zane, and Travis sat at the coffee table. The map of the neighborhood spread out before them. They'd made their plans, talked through the logistics, and now it was time to take action. Ray knew the stakes had escalated beyond his own home. This wasn't just about taking down a gang. It was about dismantling a system that had festered in the shadows for far too long. Travis leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms over his head. "So we hit the compound where they're meeting. Easy enough, right?" His tone was teasing, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. Zane's expression was serious as he scanned the map. "The problem is, we don't know how many people we're dealing with. Could be 20, could be more. We need to be prepared for anything." Ray stood, his hand brushing across the map as he traced the route they would take. "We hit them fast and hard. They've been operating out of a farm just outside of town. Lena..." Ray paused, glancing at his phone. "My sister's been feeding me info. She's told me they've been using the place for more than just meetings. They're planning something big." "Big like what?" Travis asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know," Ray replied, his jaw tightening. But I do know that whatever it is, they've been building to it for a while. They're organized, and that means we need to shut them down before they get any further. Zane was already pulling out his gear, the familiar sound of zippers and clasps filling the air. How do we approach this? We need to get in quietly, Ray said. Get intel, find their weapons and their plans. We take out their sentries, gather everything we can, then get out. We don't engage unless we have to. Travis smirked, his hand resting on the grip of his handgun. I don't know about you, Ray, but I'm always ready for a good fight. But if you say stealth, then stealth it is. Ray smiled faintly but didn't respond. He knew Travis was itching for action, but right now, strategy was the priority. We'll approach from the south side, Ray continued, marking the map with his finger. There's a line of trees that will give us cover. Zane, you'll handle surveillance. We need you to get a good look at the layout before we go in. Travis, you're with me on the ground. Once we've got the intel, we move in. Zane nodded as he organized his equipment. Got it. I'll use the drone to get a bird's eye view. We'll know exactly what we're up against. The plan was simple. Zane would use his drone to scout the area, giving them a clear understanding of where the sentries were positioned and what the interior looked like. Meanwhile, Ray and Travis would be ready to move in on the ground, neutralizing threats as they went. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. Ray checked his phone once more. The sun was starting to set, and the night was fast approaching. This was it. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him, the stakes higher than they had ever been. As he looked up, his gaze met Zane's. We don't have a lot of time. Once we go in, there's no turning back. Stay sharp. Zane gave a short nod. Always am. Travis chuckled under his breath. Well, here's to hope we don't get shot at first. Ray's eyes hardened. We do what we need to. No hesitation. They suited up in silence, the quiet of the room only broken by the sound of zippers, buckles, and the steady rhythm of their preparations. Each of them was a piece of the same puzzle, skilled, trained, and prepared for what lay ahead. But Ray couldn't shake the feeling in his gut that this mission was different from anything they had faced before. The night was thick with shadows as they approached the overgrown field that housed the farm. The trees surrounding the property created a natural barrier, cloaking them in darkness as they moved silently through the brush. Zane's drone buzzed above, its small, almost imperceptible hum blending into the night air. The faint glow of lights from inside the barn flickered on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. Ray crouched low, signaling to Zane, who had a tablet in hand, focused on the live feed from the drone. Zane's eyes scanned the screen, his expression calm but intent. There's movement, Zane whispered, pointing to the tablet. 2 guards at the front gate, 1 on the roof with a rifle. I count at least 3 inside the barn. Ray nodded. We'll take the gate first. Travis, you're with me. Zane, stay on comms. Keep us updated. The 3 of them moved as one, their military training kicking in as they approached the perimeter of the farm. Ray's heart was steady, his mind clear. They had done this 100 times before in combat zones around the world. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was personal. Ray and Travis moved closer to the gate, crouching low to stay out of sight. The 2 sentries by the entrance were talking casually, their flashlights sweeping across the ground in slow arcs. Ray signaled for Travis to move into position. The plan was simple. They would take down the guards without making a sound. Travis nodded, his eyes narrowing as he positioned himself just behind Ray. They crept forward, the sound of their footsteps barely a whisper against the dry earth. When they were within striking distance, Ray held up his hand, signaling Travis to wait. The guard closest to them turned slightly, his flashlight flicking away for just a moment. Ray seized the opportunity. He lunged forward, his hand wrapping around the guard's neck in a quick, efficient motion. He pulled the man into the shadows, rendering him unconscious with a precise chokehold. Travis handled the second guard just as smoothly. He stepped forward, using his elbow to knock the man's head back, and in one swift motion, he pressed the guard's face into the dirt. The man struggled briefly but quickly went still, unconscious before he could make a sound. Ray exhaled quietly. They were in. Clear, Travis murmured, his voice low. Move out, Ray said. Zane's voice came through their earpieces, calm and composed. You're good. The inside's clear for now. I'll keep watching. Ray and Travis moved past the gate, slipping inside the compound. The barn was ahead, but there were more threats to neutralize first. As they got closer, Ray's mind raced through the next steps. They needed to get inside, gather the intel, and get out. Every second counted. They approached the barn slowly, their movements careful and deliberate. As they neared the building, they could hear voices inside, low murmurs that were too far to make out. The sentries were still patrolling the outer perimeter, unaware of the team's presence. Ray's focus was sharp. The next step was critical. They had to disable the sentries before they could warn the others. Zane had already confirmed that the main barn was housing some of the key members of the gang. This was their chance to strike. "Stay low, stay quiet," Ray murmured to Travis. Travis nodded, his hand resting on his weapon. They moved in perfect synchronization, taking out 2 more guards with swift, efficient moves. The first guard went down with a punch to the throat. The second was disarmed with a quick swipe of Ray's knife. The barn door loomed ahead, the faint light spilling from under it, giving away its contents. Ray gestured to Travis, who crouched low beside him. "On 3, Ray whispered. They both moved toward the door, ready for whatever awaited them on the other side. The barn loomed ahead, its shadows long and foreboding. Ray's hand hovered near his weapon as he and Travis crouched behind a stack of old wooden crates, the sound of their steady breathing mixing with the quiet rustle of the wind. They could hear voices inside, louder now, and the faint clink of metal on metal. Ray's grip on his rifle tightened, the anticipation building in his chest. They were close. This was it. Zane's voice came through their earpieces, low and calm. "I've got eyes on the barn. There are 4 inside, including Scarface. I see a few weapons crates stacked near the far corner. No other movement for now." Ray nodded subtly to Travis. "We move in now. We hit them hard and fast. No hesitation." Travis gave him a quick nod, his face hard and focused. "Right behind you." They approached the barn door with a steady pace, keeping low to avoid detection. Ray's eyes darted around, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. The sentries on the roof had been dealt with, but they still had to be careful. The operation had to go off without a hitch. If it didn't, everything they'd worked for, the intel, the advantage, would be lost. Reaching the barn door, Ray paused, glancing over at Travis. His partner's expression was unreadable, but the familiarity in their silent communication spoke volumes. They had done this countless times before. They knew how to read each other. On Ray's signal, they moved. He twisted the handle quietly, easing the door open just enough to slip inside. The interior of the barn was dimly lit, and the heavy scent of dust and hay hung in the air. Ray's eyes immediately adjusted to the low light, scanning the room for threats. There they were, 4 men gathered around a table, talking in hushed voices. At the far end, Scarface stood, his back to them, a smug look on his face as he discussed something with the others. Ray's gut twisted. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the man who had threatened everything he stood for. This was the reason they were here. But before they could advance, one of the men at the table turned, catching sight of the door moving. His eyes widened as he reached for his weapon, but it was too late. Ray sprang into action, moving faster than thought. He slammed the door wide open, catching the attention of the others just as the first man fumbled for his gun. Ray's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Hands where I can see them!" The room froze. For a split second, all 4 men stood still, eyes wide with shock. Scarface's grin faltered as he slowly turned to face Ray. "Well, well," Scarface sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Look who decided to crash the party." He casually tossed the cigarette he'd been smoking to the ground, grinding it under his boot. "You think you can stop this?" Ray's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "This ends now. The terror, the violence, it all stops here." Without waiting for a response, Ray moved swiftly, his rifle aimed at Scarface. "Step away from the table and drop everything." The tension in the barn was palpable, but Scarface just stood there, his smirk returning. "You're a fool, Marine. You really think you can just waltz in here and make demands?" His eyes flicked to one of his men, a silent signal. The moment Scarface's words left his lips, the barn erupted into chaos. One of the men lunged for a nearby crate, trying to grab a weapon, while another reached for a handgun at his side. But Ray was faster. In one smooth motion, Ray dropped to a crouch and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The bullet echoed through the barn, silencing everyone. "I said, hands up!" Ray commanded, his voice sharp and unwavering. One of the men, a younger thug with a nervous twitch, glanced at his leader, uncertainty flashing across his face. He slowly raised his hands, the gun he had tried to grab falling from his fingers. Travis moved in, his steps silent but deliberate. He crossed the room quickly, disarming another thug who had tried to move toward the back of the barn. In seconds, two men were on the floor, weapons confiscated, their hands behind their heads. Scarface's face twisted in rage. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed. "We'll make sure you pay for this. You're just a dead man walking." Ray stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the gang leader. "You're done, Scarface. You've terrorized this town long enough." Scarface's arrogance faltered as he took a step back, his eyes shifting nervously. "You think I'm the only one behind this? You have no idea how deep this goes, Marine." Ray's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to know. I just need to know that this ends with you." Before Scarface could reply, one of his men lunged forward, a crowbar in hand, aiming for Ray. The man swung with all his might, but Ray sidestepped the blow with ease. He caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting it so that the crowbar clattered to the ground. With a quick jab to the man's ribs, Ray sent him sprawling backward. The last two gang members charged, fists flying. Ray dodged one attack, delivering a sharp elbow to the second thug's face. He spun, using the momentum to throw the second thug to the ground, his body hitting the barn's dusty floor with a thud. "Clear," Travis muttered, moving over to secure the last man. Ray stood over Scarface, his weapon trained on him. "This is over. Don't make it worse for yourself." Scarface staggered backward, fear creeping into his eyes as he realized the fight was slipping from his control. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small walkie-talkie. "We need backup," he muttered into it. But before Scarface could get a word in edgewise, Ray's voice rang out, sharp and decisive. "I don't think so." In one fluid motion, Ray crossed the room, snatched the walkie-talkie from Scarface's hand, and crushed it underfoot. "No more reinforcements. It's just you and me now." Scarface sneered, but there was a hint of panic in his eyes. "You think you've won, don't you?" Ray didn't answer. Instead, he signaled to Travis, who moved toward the back of the barn, where stacks of crates were arranged haphazardly. "Check for any documents, files, anything that ties them to what's going on here. We need everything." As Travis rummaged through the crates, Ray kept his eyes on Scarface. The man was breathing heavily, his bravado slipping away as the realization hit him. The gig was up. He wasn't going to walk away from this. In the quiet that followed, Zane's voice crackled through their comms. "We've got company," he said sharply. "Looks like reinforcements are on their way." Ray's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. This was what they had trained for. This was the moment they had prepared for. "Get what we need," Ray said to Travis. "Then we're out of here." The tension in the barn was palpable as Ray, Travis, and Scarface stood in a charged silence. Ray kept his eyes locked on the gang leader, watching every subtle movement. Scarface was visibly rattled, his usual bravado slipping with every passing second. Zane's voice crackled in Ray's earpiece again, sharper this time. "They've got trucks pulling up. Looks like they're bringing in reinforcements. More than I can handle. You need to move now." Ray didn't take his eyes off Scarface. "We're almost done here," he muttered under his breath. He motioned for Travis to keep searching the crates for any documents or evidence they could use. The clock was ticking, and they had to finish what they'd started before things got any worse. As Travis methodically worked through the crates, Ray turned back to Scarface, who was growing increasingly desperate. "You've been living in your little bubble, haven't you?" Ray said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "You thought no one would ever come after you. Thought you could just terrorize this town and get away with it. But it's over." Scarface sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You really think you've won, don't you? You're just a small cog in this machine. If you take me down, it won't change anything. We have people everywhere. Politicians, business owners, even some cops. You can't touch us. You'll never stop it." Ray clenched his fists. The man's arrogance was infuriating, but Ray knew better than to let that rage control him. He needed information, solid, actionable intel that would dismantle this entire operation. The threat of their backing was clear now, but it wasn't enough to just take down Scarface. Ray needed to tear the whole thing down. Zane's voice came through again, more urgent this time. Ray, the trucks are getting closer. You need to move. They've got me pinned. I don't know how much longer I can hold them off. Ray's jaw tightened. The mission had to come first. He wasn't going to let his team get caught in the middle of this mess. Travis, Ray called out, his voice cutting through the still air. Did you find anything? Travis looked up from the crate he was searching, holding up a stack of papers with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. This is it. Shipment logs, financial records, and a list of names. Looks like we've got everything we need to take down their entire operation. He quickly shoved the papers into a bag, glancing over his shoulder. But we're running out of time. Ray's heart skipped a beat as the sound of engines grew louder. They were almost here. His mind raced. There wasn't time to waste. They had what they needed, and now they had to get out. All right, let's move, Ray barked, signaling to Travis. But just as they turned to leave, Scarface's voice rang out, filled with venom. You think this is over? You think you've won because you've got a few papers? This operation is bigger than you can imagine. You won't make it out of here alive. Ray didn't look back as he moved toward the door. He knew exactly what Scarface was trying to do, make him hesitate, make him doubt. But Ray wasn't buying it. He had already come too far to stop now. Move it, Ray said, his voice cold and commanding. The three men slipped out the back of the barn, moving quickly into the shadows. The moonlight was barely enough to guide them as they made their way back to the tree line. Every footstep felt like it was weighted with the urgency of their situation. But Ray wasn't about to stop. He had a plan, and he wasn't leaving without making sure they had everything they needed. As they reached the edge of the property, Ray turned to look at Travis and Zane. We'll make sure we get everything to the authorities, but first we need to get out of here, fast. Zane, still keeping an eye on the movement around the compound, nodded. I've got a plan, let's move. They darted into the cover of the trees, making their way toward the rendezvous point, a small, secluded creek bed about a mile away from the farm. The sound of the approaching trucks echoed in the distance, their headlights cutting through the dark like a looming threat. The gang was coming for them, and Ray knew it. They had to get to the meeting point before they were surrounded. The creek bed was quiet when they arrived, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the cool night air. Ray dropped to a knee, pulling out the bag of documents and spreading them out across the ground. His fingers brushed over the papers, his eyes scanning the shipment logs and financial records. This is it, he muttered to himself. Everything we need to take them down. Travis crouched beside him, pulling out a flashlight to get a better look at the paperwork. These names, these are all high profile. Politicians, business owners, even law enforcement, he said, his voice steady but filled with disbelief. How long has this been going on? Ray shook his head. Too long, but we've got them now. We have the evidence. It's not just the gang, it's the whole network. If we expose them, we can end this. Zane stood up from his lookout position, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. We've got company. It's not just a few trucks anymore. They've mobilized a whole fleet, and they're getting close. Ray's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. They couldn't afford to get caught now. This was the moment they had worked for, the tipping point in the fight. If they failed here, everything they had fought for would be lost. He turned to Zane. We don't have much time. Get those documents uploaded to the cloud and get in touch with our contact. The feds need this, and they need it now. Zane nodded, already pulling out his phone. On it, I'll make sure they get everything before these guys show up. Ray stood, adjusting his gear. He wasn't sure how much longer they had before the gang found them. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just about getting the evidence anymore. It was about bringing down an entire operation, a network that reached deep into the heart of the community. And if that meant facing down an army of thugs, then so be it. He glanced at Travis. We stick to the plan, no matter what. Travis gave a grim smile. We've come this far. Let's finish it. As Zane worked quickly to send the data, Ray kept watch. Every rustling in the trees, every distant engine rumble had his senses on high alert. They couldn't afford to be taken by surprise. The fate of the town, and maybe more, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Ray had always been ready for battle, but this fight wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. For everyone they had lost, for every life that had been destroyed. And it wasn't over yet. Ray's pulse pounded in his ears as he crouched low behind the large rock, eyes scanning the darkened path leading to the creek bed. The truck engines roared in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was no longer just about collecting evidence. This was about survival. They had to finish what they started, and they had to do it quickly. Behind him, Zane's voice broke through the silence. "I've uploaded everything. The feds have the data. They'll be on their way." Ray nodded without turning around. "Good. Now we get out of here." But just as he said it, the sound of tires screeching against gravel echoed through the trees. The trucks had arrived. A convoy of vehicles, at least 5, pulled up just past the creek bed, their headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. Ray's heart skipped a beat. "Shit," Travis muttered under his breath. "We don't have much time." Zane immediately dropped down next to Ray, his eyes scanning the scene. "They've got us surrounded. We can't stay here." Ray cursed under his breath, his mind racing. He had no illusions that they could fight off an entire gang. They needed a way out, a distraction, something that would give them the upper hand. Ray's eyes flicked over to Zane. "You get to the north side. I'll take the south. Travis, you cover the middle. We don't let them close in." Without waiting for a response, Ray stood up, moving swiftly through the trees. His steps were silent but purposeful. The night was alive with movement. The rustling of leaves, the creaking of branches. His senses were on high alert, but there was no time to think. He had to act. He could see the flashlights sweeping through the trees now, the searchlights bouncing off the trunks as the gang members fanned out. The sound of boots crunching against the earth told him they were close. Too close. Ray's grip on his rifle tightened as he prepared for the fight. Zane had already moved ahead, using his natural agility to slip past the perimeter and get into position. He was quick, blending into the shadows, and Ray knew he'd be able to provide the support they needed. He trusted Zane with his life. He always had. Ray paused, taking a deep breath, listening for the sounds of movement. One of the trucks had stopped just to his left, and a group of men had already disembarked. Ray could make out their figures, silhouetted in the moonlight. They were armed, rifles slung over their shoulders, hands clutching batons. Ray was ready. He counted them in his head. 4 men, spread out. The first one was distracted, chatting with a buddy, unaware that Ray was only yards away. His target was clear. He'd take out the weakest link first. Ray moved like a shadow, his footsteps soundless on the dirt. The first man didn't know what hit him. Ray's hand shot out, covering the man's mouth and nose in a swift, practiced motion. His body went limp almost immediately, Ray lowering him gently to the ground without a sound. But the second guard was quicker than Ray had expected. He spun around, eyes narrowing. Ray's heart raced as he raised his rifle. But before the guard could pull his weapon, a single shot rang out from the darkness. Zane had him covered. Ray exhaled a quiet sigh of relief as the man crumpled to the ground. 2 down, Ray muttered under his breath. Travis's voice came through the earpiece, low but filled with the kind of energy Ray knew he needed. "I've got movement, Ray. They're starting to circle around. I can't hold them off much longer." Ray gritted his teeth. He didn't want to leave Travis exposed, but they had no choice. The plan was to distract the gang while Zane, Travis, and Ray made their escape. "Head to the rendezvous point," Ray ordered, his voice firm. "I'll cover you." With one last glance at the now disbanding group of gang members, Ray slipped into the trees, keeping a careful distance between himself and the nearest vehicle. The air was thick with tension, and his fingers ached from gripping the rifle so tightly. He could hear them moving, their voices sharp and demanding. "Find them! They can't be far." Ray had to act fast. He moved lower, trying to stay hidden from their view. The last thing they needed was to be caught between the gang and a group of reinforcements. He checked his weapon one last time, making sure the chamber was loaded. He didn't know how long they had until the gang figured out their position. He needed a way to confuse them, throw them off their trail. That's when the idea came to him. Without hesitation, Ray grabbed a nearby rock and threw it as far as he could. The noise of the rock crashing into a nearby tree echoed through the air. The gang's attention snapped in the direction of the sound, and in the confusion, Ray made his move. With the cover of the chaos, he moved quickly toward the rendezvous point, keeping his head low. His feet barely made a sound on the forest floor. He had to make it to Travis and Zane before the gang had time to regroup. They reached the rendezvous point just as the gang members began to form back into groups. Zane was already there, crouched behind a large boulder, his eyes scanning the area for movement. Travis was nearby, taking cover under a thick layer of branches, his weapon trained on the approaching threat. Ray dropped to a crouch beside them, pulling his rifle into position. The three of them were positioned perfectly, and Ray could see the vehicles approaching through the trees, their headlights cutting through the shadows. The gang had realized something was wrong. They were tightening their search, trying to close in on the team's position. There was nowhere to hide now. It was do or die. Ray exchanged a glance with Zane, then turned to Travis. "On my count," Ray whispered, "we take them out. Fast, no hesitation." The sound of footsteps grew louder. There were at least 10 men closing in. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The mission wasn't over, not until every last one of them had been neutralized. Ray's voice was steady, calm. 1, 2, 3. The three men opened fire simultaneously. Zane's shots were precise, taking out two of the approaching gang members before they even had a chance to react. Travis dropped another thug with a well-aimed shot to the chest. Ray, calm under pressure, neutralized two more with swift, controlled movements. But the gang was starting to fire back. A bullet zipped past Ray's head, grazing his cheek. The sting made his adrenaline spike, but he ignored it. His training kicked in, and he stayed focused on the fight. "Cover fire!" Ray shouted, signaling Zane and Travis to provide a diversion. "Move! We need to get the hell out of here!" They continued to fight, ducking and dodging as the gang pushed forward. Ray moved quickly, his rifle blazing as he provided cover for Zane and Travis to retreat. The gang was disorganized, caught off guard by the precision of their attack. Ray's mind raced as he glanced at the forest edge. The retreat was going smoothly, but they needed to move faster. The gang had reinforcements just over the horizon, and they had to be gone before the real battle began. The sound of distant sirens was the only thing keeping Ray calm. The feds were on their way. If they could just hold out a little longer, the cavalry would arrive. Zane gave him a quick nod. "We're clear, let's move." With one last look back at the now chaotic scene, Ray sprinted toward the trees, his breath heavy in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. Not yet. As the team disappeared into the forest, the sound of the sirens grew louder. Ray knew they had done everything they could to stop the operation. The pieces were in place, the evidence secured. Now it was up to the authorities to finish it. Ray's breath came in sharp gasps as he and his team made their way through the thick forest, the heavy underbrush crunching beneath their boots. The sounds of the chaos behind them slowly faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet whispers of the night. The sirens were louder now, and the headlights of approaching police cars were visible through the trees. They had done their part, gathered the evidence, neutralized the threat, and provided the authorities with the tools they needed to take down the gang. Ray couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief, though it was short-lived. They had done what needed to be done, but the mission wasn't over, not yet. They still had to make sure everything was in place, and they still had to deal with the people who had funded and protected the gang's operation. The battle had shifted, and now it was time for a new kind of fight, one that would take everything they had. The trio moved quickly but cautiously, staying off the main paths and using the natural cover of the forest to keep their movements concealed. Ray could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This had been more than just a fight for survival. It had been a fight for justice, for the families who had lived in fear, for the communities that had been terrorized, for everyone who had been caught in the web of corruption that had allowed this gang to thrive. They reached the designated rendezvous point by the creek bed, where they had agreed to meet before they split up. Ray paused, turning to Travis and Zane, his gaze steady. "We did good tonight," Ray said, his voice low but firm. "But it's not over. We still need to see this through." Travis gave a half smile. though it was more weary than triumphant. Hell of a night, huh? But you're right. This isn't over until those bastards are behind bars for good. Zane nodded in agreement. I've seen some serious stuff in my time, but what's been going on here? This goes beyond what we expected. There's more at play. It's just a matter of time before the real fight starts. Ray looked between the two of them, his mind racing with the thoughts of what they had uncovered. They had gotten the financial records, the shipment logs, and the names that tied the gang to influential figures in town. They had everything they needed to bring down the entire operation, everything but the full backing of the system. It's not just the gang, Ray muttered. It's the people backing them, the ones who think they can control this town with money and power. We need to take them down next. And that means going after the ones pulling the strings, the funders, the protectors. We have to make sure they can't just hide behind their money. Zane gave him a determined look. So what's the plan? We go after them, Ray said, his voice hard. We get the authorities the proof they need, but we also make sure we expose the people who've been protecting them. We bring this down from the top, not just from the street level. If we do this right, we'll shut the whole operation down and make sure they never come back. Travis let out a low whistle. Sounds like we're going after the big leagues now. Ray gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Exactly. They had a long night ahead of them. The authorities were already on their way to secure the farm, but Ray knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge would come when they confronted the men and women who had been funding and enabling the gang's terror. The next morning was a blur. Ray woke to the sound of his phone vibrating on the table, the harsh ring cutting through the quiet of his dimly lit living room. He reached over and grabbed it, squinting at the screen. It was a message from Maya, his sister. Maya, the news is all over it. The cops raided the farm last night. They've got most of the gang, but some of them are still out there. What happened? Ray's fingers hovered over the screen as he typed a quick reply. He had to let her know he was okay, but he also had to be careful. There were still dangerous people out there who didn't know their operation had been compromised. Ray, we did what we could. The farm's been raided. Most of the gang's been arrested. It's not over, though. We still have a long way to go. He put the phone down, rubbing his eyes as he stood up. The adrenaline from the night before had faded, leaving a heavy fatigue behind. But there was no time to rest. The real work was just beginning. Ray glanced around his house, still littered with debris from the previous night's attack. The sight of the broken windows, scorched door frame, and damaged walls twisted something deep inside him. This wasn't just his fight, it was everyone's. And it wasn't over until the last of the corrupt officials and gang leaders were locked away. Travis and Zane arrived soon after, both looking equally worn out. The battle may have been over, but the war was far from won. We've got to move fast, Ray said, his voice sharp. The cops have the evidence we need, but they'll need more to move against the bigger players. We can't let them escape. We've got a short window before they can cover their tracks. Zane nodded, his eyes focused. I've been keeping an eye on the news. They're reporting that some of the bigger names in town are already distancing themselves from the gang. We need to move fast before they clean up their mess. Travis was already checking his gear, making sure everything was ready. So, what's the next step? Ray pulled out the map again. We've got a list of names, politicians, business leaders, some cops. We start there. We bring them to the light, make sure the authorities know who's behind all of this, and we make sure they can't bury it again. Zane gave a short nod. Let's get it done. The plan was simple. Gather the remaining pieces of evidence, contact their federal contact, and expose the people who were still helping the gang hide in the shadows. Ray knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew they had already come too far to back down now. The day dragged on as they worked, following leads, tracking down the names they had uncovered. The further they dug, the more they found. Offshore accounts, backdoor deals, the unmistakable fingerprints of people who had used their power to protect the very operation that had been terrorizing their town. It wasn't long before Ray got the call. "Ray Harper," he answered, his voice tight with anticipation. "It's done," came the voice on the other end, a federal agent they had been working with. "We've got everything we need. The operation's already been taken down. We've got enough to move on the financiers and the law enforcement officers who've been covering for the gang. Ray's breath caught in his throat. It's over? The agent's voice was steady but filled with a quiet confidence. It's just beginning. We've got them now, thanks to you. Ray looked over at Zane and Travis, a small sense of victory swelling in his chest. It wasn't over yet, but they had done it. They had exposed the network. They had taken down the men and women who thought they could control this town with fear and money. The next few days passed in a blur of news reports, police activity, and briefings. The town was on edge, still processing the chaos that had unfolded in the days following the raid. People were talking about the gang bus, the arrests, and the people who had been brought down. It was all over the local news, but there were still whispers, rumors that the operation wasn't completely finished. There were still people out there who hadn't been caught. There was still work to do. Ray sat quietly in his living room, staring at the television as the news anchor recapped the events of the past few days. The reporter mentioned the shocking arrests of several influential figures, including business owners, politicians, and even a few police officers. Ray's heart tightened at the mention of the names. It was over for some of them, but for others, it was only the beginning. The corruption ran deep. The town was waking up to the truth, and Ray knew this fight was far from over. Ray leaned back in his chair, staring at the evidence that had been laid out on the table in front of him. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of the fan above him. The police had already made their rounds, taken what they needed, and begun processing the arrested gang members. The names had been delivered to the right authorities, and the feds had moved swiftly, with arrests made at every level: businessmen, politicians, even law enforcement officials. The web they had unraveled was bigger than Ray had ever imagined. But as the days passed, a realization slowly crept in. A gnawing unease that something was missing. There were still pieces to the puzzle they hadn't quite put together yet. The people who were behind the funding of the operation, the shadowy figures who had remained untouchable for so long, were still out there. It wasn't just about taking down the foot soldiers anymore. It was about going after the puppet masters, the ones who thought they could remain hidden. The feds had assured Ray that they were on the case, but Ray's instincts told him this wasn't over. The gang had been the face of the operation, but the true power was held elsewhere, deep within the corridors of power, where corruption ran unchecked. Something doesn't feel right, Ray muttered to himself. Travis, who had been pacing the room, stopped and looked at him. His expression hardened. Yeah, I know what you mean. This is bigger than we thought. You think they're going to just walk away from this? Ray shook his head. They'll try to bury it. They'll use their influence, their power, and everything else they have to cover their tracks. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen. Zane entered the room then, his face grim, and tossed a folder onto the table in front of Ray. I've been going through the evidence. There's a couple of names here that we didn't see before. People who are connected to the bigger players. We've been looking at the wrong targets. Ray flipped through the folder, his eyes narrowing as he read the names on the list. Businessmen, city council members, a few more cops, ones who hadn't been implicated before, but whose ties to the gang ran deep. It was clear that some of them had been pulling strings from the shadows. We need to go after these people, Ray said, his voice low with determination. We can't let them escape. They'll try to cover this up, but we have the proof now. We just need to make sure the right people see it. Zane nodded, already pulling up the necessary information on his tablet. I'll start contacting our contacts in the feds. We need them to hit these places hard and fast. If we wait too long, the people behind this could make a move to cover their tracks. Let's do this, Ray replied, slamming the folder shut. We've been fighting this fight on the streets, but now it's time to take the battle to the real enemy. As they gathered their gear and finalized their plan, Ray felt the weight of the task ahead of them. They were no longer just confronting thugs. They were up against the very infrastructure that had enabled the gang to thrive. These were the people who had allowed the violence to escalate unchecked, people who had profited from the suffering of others. The fight was no longer a physical one. It was a fight for justice, and Ray wasn't going to let it slip away. They split up, with Zane and Travis taking the north side of town to start their investigation into the politicians and business owners linked to the gang, while Ray worked on gathering intel on the remaining law enforcement officers who were involved. His mind was sharp, but there was a sense of unease that lingered in the pit of his stomach. The more they uncovered, the more complicated things seemed to get. Ray's first stop was the local police precinct. He knew he had to be careful here. Too many eyes were watching, too many people with a vested interest in keeping the truth buried. But he had no choice. If he didn't confront the problem head-on, then the fight for the town's soul would be lost. The precinct was quiet when Ray entered. He nodded curtly to a few officers as he made his way to the captain's office, where he had arranged a meeting with a trusted contact, someone who had been feeding him information about the corruption in the force. The captain, a grizzled veteran of the force named John Peterson, looked up when Ray entered. "You're looking like hell," Peterson remarked, his voice gravelly. "You all right?" Ray nodded, though his eyes betrayed the toll the last few days had taken on him. "I'm fine, but we need to talk. I've got more information. I need your help." Peterson's eyes flickered with something, a wariness, maybe concern, but he didn't hesitate. "What's going on?" Ray sat down across from him, sliding a folder of evidence across the table. "These names," he said, pointing to the papers, "they're tied to the gang, but they're also tied to more than just the streets. These people have power. Politicians, business owners, cops. Some of them have been covering for the gang, enabling their activities, and I need your help to bring them down." Peterson's face hardened as he flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing. "You've got some serious names here. You sure you want to take this all the way?" Ray didn't hesitate. "Yes, this ends now." Peterson hesitated for a long moment before speaking again. "You're not the only one who's been fighting this. There are a few of us here who've been trying to clean things up, but it's a battle. We don't have much time. These people will come after us. But if you're serious about this, then I'm with you." Ray looked at Peterson, nodding in appreciation. "We're all in this together." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and fast-paced action. Ray's heart raced as they put the final pieces of their plan into place. The feds had been gathering their forces and everything was lining up for one final push. The gang's operations were being taken apart piece by piece, and Ray knew it was only a matter of time before the biggest names were exposed. But the deeper they dug, the more Ray realized just how big this network really was. The gang was just one branch of a much larger criminal enterprise, and even if they were able to take down the gang members themselves, there would always be someone else waiting in the wings. Someone willing to fill the power vacuum left behind. Ray had known it would be difficult, but now with every passing day, the true scale of the challenge became clearer. Zane's voice came through his earpiece as they geared up for the final round of the operation. "Ray, you've got more coming your way. I've been in touch with the feds. They've got eyes on some of the bigger players, but we've got to move fast." Ray nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. "We're ready." As the clock ticked down, Ray couldn't help but think of the people in the town, those who had been living in fear for far too long. This was their chance for real change. But that didn't mean the road would be easy, not by a long shot. They were going after the leaders now, the ones who had operated from the shadows, hidden behind their power and influence. Ray wasn't about to let them get away with it, and if it meant facing the darkest corners of the town, then so be it. Ray stood at the edge of the precinct parking lot, his fingers gripping his rifle, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. The weight of everything that had happened in the last few days, the raids, the arrests, the trail of corruption leading straight to the heart of the city, was almost too much to bear. But he couldn't afford to slow down now. They were close, so close. The feds had been closing in on the financiers behind the gang's operation, and now it was time to strike. They had the evidence, shipments, records, accounts, and the names of every key player involved. The operation wasn't just about taking down the gang anymore. It was about dismantling an entire system of corruption that had held this town hostage for far too long. Zane and Travis had already moved into position, their eyes sharp as they prepared for the final sweep. Ray had gone ahead to meet with their contact in the feds, and now everything was in place. The pieces were about to fall into place. The leaders of the operation would finally be exposed. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Peterson, his contact at the precinct. "Peterson, the warrants are issued. We're hitting the targets at midnight. Be ready." Ray exhaled slowly, his mind racing. This was it. It wasn't just about putting a few more criminals behind bars. It was about giving the town back to the people who had fought for it, who had stood strong while the gang terrorized their lives. It was about justice. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Ray couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had done everything he could to prepare, to set this in motion. But there were always variables, and variables had a way of changing the outcome. The sirens in the distance echoed through the night air, signaling that the operation was beginning. The feds were rolling in. Ray nodded to himself and gave a final glance at the precinct before moving toward his rendezvous with Zane and Travis. Ray, Zane, and Travis moved swiftly through the streets, staying low, moving as shadows. The feds were already in place, securing the exits and surrounding the properties they were targeting. They had the element of surprise. This wasn't just a raid, it was a takedown. They were going after the ringleaders, the ones who had kept their hands clean while pulling the strings. Zane's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Target's clear. We're moving in. Let's finish this." Ray signaled to Travis and Zane to take their positions. The target house, one of the major financiers, was just ahead. Ray could already see the lights flashing from the feds' vehicles parked down the street. They were coming in hard, no hesitation. But just as Ray moved forward, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming caught his attention. A man stepped out onto the porch, looking confused, his hand reaching into his jacket. The telltale glint of a gun was visible under the porch light. "Stay down," Ray whispered sharply into the comms. He dove to the side, taking cover behind a vehicle, just as the man's hand went to his weapon. Ray's rifle was already up, trained on the man's torso. "Don't," Ray warned, his voice cold. The man froze. He recognized the situation. Ray wasn't backing down. The feds were closing in fast, and there was nowhere for him to run. The man slowly raised his hands, the gun falling from his grip. Ray stood up, motioning for the man to stay still. "You're done." The final round of arrests went smoother than Ray had anticipated. The team was swift, their actions precise. The leaders of the operation were arrested one by one, taken down with the overwhelming force of federal law enforcement. But the real victory came when the evidence, the financial records, the offshore accounts, the connections to local politicians, was made public. The town was rocked. People began talking about what had really been going on behind the scenes, and the truth spread like wildfire. Peterson called Ray just as the sun was rising, the weight of their victory clear in his voice. "It's over. We've got the ringleaders in custody. The financials are in the hands of the feds. This town won't be the same again." Ray leaned back against the hood of a police car, staring out at the city. The work wasn't over. There were still people who would try to cover up the truth, still politicians who would try to spin the narrative. But the light had been shone into the dark corners of the city. People were waking up. "We did good," Ray said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. Zane stood next to him, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the street. "It's just the beginning. We've made a dent, but the work's never really done, is it?" Ray nodded. It's never really done. But for now, this town's safe. People can breathe again." Travis appeared from the shadows, a grin on his face despite the exhaustion. "And we'll make sure it stays that way." Ray smiled faintly, glancing at his two brothers in arms. "Yeah, we will." As the town slowly woke up, the morning light reflected off the shattered windows, the streets now calm and still. There was no more fear in the air, no more whispers of violence. What had been built on terror was finally being torn down, piece by piece. Ray stood at the center of it all, his heart still heavy but filled with a sense of purpose. There was always more work to be done, always another fight to be fought. But today, for the first time in a long time, Ray allowed himself a moment of peace. He had brought the fight to them, and for now at least the battle was won. He turned to look at the horizon as the last of the police cars disappeared down the road. "It's over," Ray said quietly to himself, "but I'll be ready for the next fight." The war wasn't over, but they had won a battle that would echo for generations, and that, Ray knew, was enough.